All right, welcome to Agent Provocateur with Allan, Walsh, and Adam Wylde. And Allan, we have a very special guest today, as we do every show. His name's Paul Gagné. Can you tell us a little bit? We're going to talk to him about 10 minutes. What are we in for?
Well, we're going to get an education on what NHL players go through off the ice, really focused on two things: strength and conditioning in the off season over the summer, and also injury rehabilitation. Both off-ice training and injury rehab have been honed and fine-tuned today down to a very extensive science. Mm-hmm. But Paul and I started working together closely about 25 years ago when injuries were not, how to rehab injuries was not very well known. Summer training was not really a big focus for many professional athletes. It was golf season and time to have fun and enjoy yourselves. Nowadays, players at the end of their hockey season will maybe take 2 weeks off and start training again for the next year.
Wow.
And we're going to talk extensively about what Paul does, some of his background, players he's worked with over the years, share some stories, and really get a great education on that part of the hockey business that isn't very well known to most people and isn't discussed nearly enough as to the importance of having that piece of your career in place when you go into the off season or you suffer a significant injury.
Well, so that's going to be fascinating. In the meantime, I want to ask you about this because there was a Justin Faulk quote floating around that plays into something we talk about on the Steve Dangle podcast all the time. And it's the perception of Canada and about wanting to play in Canada. And obviously with COVID, there's complications with crossing the border either way. And this is what he had to say. I'm not looking forward to going to Canada one bit. But we'll play some hockey games and get it over with and then come back. And he was apparently referencing the COVID-19 procedures required for crossing the border between the United States and Canada. He said, I mean, it just seems like that things are going to be a little different up there than they are here. I like where we're at in this country, so we'll go with that. Now, the Calgary Flames social media team had a real fun time after the Calgary Flames blew out the St. Louis Blues. But I do want to ask you about this because obviously this is an issue that is affecting players every day.
Every day. And I think there's a couple of things at play here. Number one, coming into Canada and playing before empty buildings or reduced fans in buildings is not fun. And everybody misses having a full building. Obviously, the Canadian government right now has more stringent COVID rules regarding coming into the country, and the society is being impacted differently than what's going on in the United States right now. Without making any comments about who's right, who's wrong, you can go to a game in Tampa or go to a game in Vegas, and there's a full building. Mm-hmm. You barely see anybody wearing masks. And then in Montreal or Ottawa or Toronto, or even really across Canada, when there are home games played, the buildings are virtually empty or very few people are allowed in. So there's that. I think for players playing for Canadian teams coming into the United States, there's a fear of testing positive. NHL players are still tested daily. That's going to stop after the All-Star break, and that's been announced. But players coming into the United States, if they do test positive, the CDC recently reduced the isolation time for asymptomatic people to 5 days, and the NHL fell in line with that. However, here's the big thing that most people don't know. After day 5, assuming you've tested positive while in the United States and you play for a Canadian team and you want to go back to Canada, you cannot fly. You cannot get on a plane and fly back to Canada after 5 days. the only way you can go back into Canada is on a private air ambulance, which is extremely costly and very difficult to arrange. Now, if you live, if you're playing for a team near a border, say Montreal with Vermont, New York State, or Vancouver with Seattle, you could drive across after 5 days in a car. But when you enter Canada, your isolation period, your quarantine period restarts back to zero. So if you did your 5 days in isolation, for example, in Seattle, and after day 6, you now want to drive from Seattle to Vancouver, you can do that. But once you cross over, you're now legally obligated to quarantine for 10 more days. So there are a lot of players who have been stranded in hotels after testing positive, where they have to stay put for 10 days, even though the isolation period is only 5. So it's really both ways. I think, yes, I understand when players have a reticence about going on a Canadian trip and playing in Canada. But I think what's behind a lot of it is players being worried about testing positive on the road in the other country that they don't play in, not their home city, and then having to be away from their family, away from their team for up to 15, 16 days, depending on where they are and how quickly they can get back home. So there's a lot of that going on right now. For the last 2 months, I've had a lot of players call me. I mean, we know that over 400 players have tested positive since Omicron became prevalent as a variant since about the first week of December. And players have called, "Hey, I tested positive and I'm in New York," and or I tested positive, I'm in Florida, and they play for a Canadian team. And you're now having to work logistically on, okay, what's going to be the plan for the next 10 days? You can't leave your hotel room for 5, and you're talking about dealing with, getting food to them, working on all those things. And then even after the 5-day period, with your isolation is over, but you can't go anywhere.
Right.
So it's been challenging. And I understand where those comments are coming from. There's a reticence to have something like that happen to you when you're on the road. I think that so many players have tested positive so far in the NHL. I think we're over 70% right now. I don't know how many more players, I don't want to make light of it, but I don't know how many more players can test positive. And now that we're no longer going to be testing after the All-Star break on a daily basis, I think that at least for the NHL, all of those things are going to be, not as prevalent as they have been since December.
Well, and that's the thing, right? It's not just being away from your family, which is tough enough, right? Right. Even if a player is single, let's say they're fighting for a spot in the lineup, and then they can't play. You're stuck in a hotel room for 14 days. The NHL, that means that somebody else gets a shot and maybe they play better, or maybe it's out of sight, out of mind with a coach, or et cetera, et cetera. The issues go on and on and on. And I'm not saying that's a Justin Faulk issue. He clearly has earned his spot in the lineup, but all the same, there's a lot of question marks around that. And I think Canadians, and I think rightfully so, didn't hear that necessarily in the context. I certainly didn't. That it was maybe meant it, right? Listening to that, I go, okay, well, I can understand why he's saying that. Canadians are a little bit, and Allan, I think you know this, a little bit defensive because, when Brian Burke was on Sportsnet, he would talk about the fact that, we got an 8-team no trade list. That's 7 Canadian teams in Buffalo, right? That's where we instantly go. So right. That's, and you can understand that, right? A lot of people don't want to, hockey players, well, I don't want to play in Toronto. The media is too tough. I don't want to play in Montreal. The media is too tough. I want to, I just want to go about my life after the game's over. That's where I think a lot of people thought it was coming from. Not necessarily that it was, these restrictions could be a huge pain and it could really cost me and my team. And also, I guess, staying in playing shape.
It's interesting you say that because not really a cross-border issue, but I had a player who was playing like gangbusters in the American Hockey League, and he got called up to an NHL team, had a great first game, scored, and really he's looking like, hey, there's opportunity. A bunch of guys are out with COVID. We can come in and make a real impression for 5, 6, 7 games. And maybe this is the shot that he's been waiting for. And then he tested positive. And that's, you just referenced something like that. That's the kind of stuff that has been going on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, with the lack of testing, the no testing after the All-Star break, we'll see how much that changes. Until then though, Allan, without further ado, let's bring on Paul.
Let's do it. Welcome to another episode of Agent Provocateur. I'm Allan Walsh with Adam Wylde. Our guest today is a strength and conditioning specialist who's been working with some of the top Olympic and professional athletes for the last 38 years. A posturologist, a rehab specialist who's worked with many top NHL players, including Jonathan Huberdeau, Jonathan Drouin, Max Pacioretty, Marc-Andre Fleury, Derek Brassard, Marty Havlat. He's also worked with George St. Pierre and the 3 Dufour Lapointe sisters on their way to the Olympics, and many, many others. Let's welcome to the podcast, Paul Gagné.
Welcome, Paul.
Thank you guys for having me.
It's great to have you, Paul.
We're excited. Allan has spoken about you in glowing terms and said that you're going to get us all in shape.
I mean, it depends on you, but I'll give you the tools. Yeah.
So, Paul, can you tell us, to start off, what's a posturologist?
I mean, basically, we have to deal with gravity. That's one thing. And then in many, like posturology is pretty old, like even Sharrington in the early 1900s. And it goes back to even to the first writing about posturology was in the 1600s. And human beings were always been fascinated. How do we stand up? Because we're 5 times longer than our base of support called the feet. And any other mammals, especially our cousin primates, they don't stand all the time. Like a gorilla, a chimp, orangutan, they go up on 2 to feed or fight, but they go back on 4. And why something happened in our evolution that we stood up, but that's why we have back pain. That's why we have a lot of stuff, because we're not made to be standing up. It's something happened. I'm not sure what, but what happened is that it creates a lot of problem. It creates an imbalance. I mean, again, you're 5 times longer than your base of support. And if your feet are not well aligned, basically you need to study that. Posturology englobes mainly the receptors, what's connected to your brain that will influence how do you stand against gravity. How many times you've seen it, Allan, athletes coming in, one shoulder is down, the neck is this way, feet are like this flat. And the coach or the mom said, I want his first 5 steps faster. Says, yeah, but we have to change something. Then through history with science, they started, especially Dr. Bricot from France, he started that about 40 years ago, and Dr. Roll from south of France, to study the impact of the muscle of the eyes, not the eyesight, but the movement and the skin of the foot on the brain and on the posture. And they found, like, if you just tickle the foot, bare feet, it will change how you're standing. If you do eye exercise, you could do the test yourself. Stand up, close your eyes, feel where you are, stand on one leg, eyes open, obviously, feel how you are, left, right. Then just take your 2 thumbs in front of you and you rotate your head side to side, looking at the thumbs. 20, redo the test, and I guarantee you that you should feel more stable. Why? Because by moving your head with your eyes, you what you work on your VOR, vestibular, meaning inner ear, ocular reflex. Now NFL is in the playoffs, big excitement. You run for you're a wide receiver. You're running for the ball, and when a couple of guys wants to take your head off, but to be able to fix your eyes on the ball as you're running, it's your VOR, vestibular, your inner ear, it's almost like your GPS, ocular reflex. Then guys that they had a lot of concussion will have that defect. But this is one part of posturology. And you've seen me doing these things, and people, they think it's magic. You saw guys on one leg could not stand. In 2 minutes, they're standing with their eyes closed. But it's basically when you understand what's influenced by the brain and connection with the muscle and the skin, the fascia, then you could activate it. The goal, again, is to make you in harmony with gravity. Because if you're standing up like this all day, leaning forward, like kids now, they're sitting, Zoom, they're watching something always down, their posture getting worse and worse. I mean, we're almost the same age. I'm a little older than you, but when we were kids, we didn't sit down. Mom had to sit us down to dinner and then fly off outdoor. That's why posture of kids back then in our time, I don't want to sound like an old fart, but I'm born in 1961. We to penalize us, our parents used to tell us, you stay inside. Huh? No. Now, if my son is 23 and not long ago, if I want to punish them, you're gonna go outside. Huh? What are you talking about? See, that's why we deteriorate. And again, the role of the posturologist is to analyze the 3-plane of space. We take a plumb line, or now we have very sensitive apparatus to measure, are you aligned with your shoulder, your hips, your feet against gravity? Most people are not. Most people are forward, creating a lot of tension in the feet. Are your feet flat? Or if one is more flat than the other? A lot of kids now, they have it way more than before. That's because of running shoes and the sitting position. Sitting position kills us all the time. And that's the key. That's why we will rebalance them with exercise and remeasure. Everything is very objective, and it's not me about it. It's like the parents, they see it, the kids or the pro athletes like, whoa, no one ever touched my feet when they were looking at my knees and hips. I'm very fortunate because I'm part of a big committee, even for soccer. I presented many times as the isokinetic symposium. It's the biggest symposium in the world for soccer. It's usually in London sometime, but most of the time it's in London. And I'm French Canadian from Montreal. They look at me like, what do you know about soccer? But it has nothing to do. It has to do with the brain. And I'm always surprised about, like, they talk about ankle injuries and hamstring, and no one talks about the foot. Same thing in hockey. That's the key. That's why, as a posturologist, we're able to detect just by looking at the athlete, how he stands, how he walks, how he's going to be able to skate. And wow, that's very interesting. And it takes like a couple of minutes.
Now, Paul, you and I, full disclosure, you and I have been working very closely together now for 25 years.
Yep.
So you and I started together really when I had just been in the business for representing players for a couple of years. And I've always been fascinated by how people in their field of work got their starts. So how did you get into this line of work? What's your history in that regard? And maybe you'll talk about starting to work with NHL players when we met.
Well, I'm born in 1961 in Lachine. If you're familiar with Lachine, it's not Westmount, it's southwest of Montreal, and you got a couple of choices of career. Either you work with Dominion Bridge, Dominion Engineering back then, you became a pro hockey player, or a Hell's Angel. That was pretty much our choice. And back then, I mean, Allan is from Chamonix. He saw what kind of ethnic tension could happen in these areas. But in Lachine, half the city was Anglophone, kind of Irish, tough, not from London, Buckingham Palace, and French, not from Versailles Castle. We're both kind of hooligans on both sides. And pretty much we got into fights very young. Like it was pretty bad actually. And the good thing is my grandma on my mom's side is from Belfast, and I spoke English very young. Then I was kind of bilingual. Then I didn't get my head. I'm only 5'6". I didn't get my head smashed up to get too much. But my mom, as a good mother, she said, "Listen, he has a big mouth, and we live in a tough neighborhood. I'll put him in judo." I was 6 years old, kind of small build, kind of frail, and already I was pretty good in hockey. Like in Lachine, it was a mecca for hockey. You got Lachine, LaSalle, Verdun, Villemard. If you go back in the 60s and early 70s, you got guys like Denis Savard, Yvan Cournoyer, the guy who Normand Cournoyer's brother. I knew him very well. You got Jacques Lemaire from Ville-LaSalle. You got Dollard Saint-Laurent, Phil Goyette. You got all these guys, Mario Lemieux. I mean, even Claude Lemieux lived many years in LaSalle. And that created, every time we were outdoor playing hockey, it was a big, big rivalry. You had about 5-6 rinks, and each caliber outdoor. We're not about organized hockey. I'm talking about outdoor in the winter. And that was really the competition was really big. If you made it to double letters, it means that you were pretty good, because again, that was about the only sport we did. And that was our way out of kind of, I don't say misery because we had fun, but it was fun. That's how I started to get interested into conditioning, because although I was a small build, because I was doing combat sport, judo, then I did wrestling. I started around 11 years old. Then although I was not that great in hockey, I was able to play with the best because of my conditioning. And that's why it triggers me around 12, 13 years old to read all the magazines from Muscle and Fitness, Muscle Mag, and it was easy for me to build muscle. My dad also was kind of built. He always lift weights and train. Then for me, because I was small, when I started to put on size, I got respect. Although I was still very short, and my hockey game became better. Although I was never good, my level of conditioning was so good that I was able to play in double letters all the time, a bit like a Guy Carbonneau against the best player. They hated me because in wrestling, it's 3 rounds of 5 minutes. What is playing 20 minutes in a hockey game and sitting down for 2 or 3 minutes? It's nothing. Like for us, it's perception. That's how I started to investigate. That's what I always said to myself. That's what I want to do later in life. And then I went to school in that, study it, and got very lucky, met many of the Europeans. See, Montreal is a good platform for French people, English people, American. It's kind of a variety, and that's what made us going into neuroscience from south of France, more biomechanic from the US and England, and the combo of what we had. And then that's why I think, in my opinion, in Canada, we have some of the top strength and conditioning guys in the world because of that open mind. And also we're lucky, we're kind of bombarded because of the French language, the English, the kind of European style. And also hockey could be, in my opinion, the toughest sport to prepare as a team, even more than rugby. I had the chance to work with very high level rugby players in the world in teams. And they always say, "Oh yeah, you're hockey players." Says, "Guys, I agree. Rugby is great, but you don't have skates under your feet. Everything goes down the drain as soon as you put skates." And that's the thing. It's very hard for us to predict what's going to happen on the ice until we see them on the ice, because you don't train in the gym with skates. A rugby player, a soccer player, a boxer, MMA fighter trains in the gym with his tools, what he has under his feet. Hockey, it's skates. You've seen guys over the years, Allan, that bench pressing and squatting beat all records. They played maybe one game in the show, and I won't mention name. You know what I'm talking about. And other guys, they had a hard time to do one chin up. They had a hard time at the combine to do one push up or like bench press their body weight, and they made $35, $40, $45 million during their career. Again, don't get me wrong. Doesn't mean that you need to be out of shape to be a pro, but there's a limit on that. You need talent. And I'm good, but I can't give you talent. I'll give you the conditioning. For me, when Allan brought me a player, super talented, but super out of shape, that was a feast for me. But a player that was in decent shape, with limited talent or ability. I don't like talent, but abilities. Some people, I mean, they're limited. That was a tougher one for me because already the athlete was in good shape, but talent-wise, I couldn't give that to them.
So how did the two of you meet, Allan? Like, Paul, Allan, do you guys remember your first meeting?
But basically, Norm Conway was their scout, and Norm was my coach when I was 10 years old. We're That's from right. the same area. And then he sent me a kid, and then he says, I didn't even recognize him because I didn't see Norm for 25 years. And Norm was a very good, sorry, Norm, but he was a very good looking guy back then. Short, like small, black hair. And he was like kind of a playboy, and women loved him. And I see him coming in. I didn't even recognize him in the gym because he got a little bigger and his hair got white. Still got a full set of hair. He's very lucky. But then you know, me and Norm being like, we were very close when we were younger. Then I started to pick on him and Norm and all the boys in hockey. And that's how it started. And he saw like the guys he was bringing me. He was like, hey, guys are doing better. It's very not conventional what you're doing with them. And I see that they appreciate it. And then I met with Allan right away after when Norm organized a meeting. And that was the start. That's how we started.
When we started, there were really no other agents in hockey that were working closely with someone with your skills and your talent and doing what you did in partnership together, especially younger players, to get them on the road to being pros. And it's not just strength and conditioning. With Paul, it was always about, part-time life coach, talking about nutrition. You can talk about your work with Dr. Joubert with feet. It really was a holistic approach. You hear that word a lot these days, and many people don't know what it means, but it really was looking at literally every single level of ways you could be better, stronger, faster, smarter about your own body off the ice. And that's really how Paul and I first got started. And maybe you want to talk about some of the work we did from there.
But the goal always, that's why I always had fun to work with Allan and Norm, was a team approach. See, we all have good, big egos, everybody, but that's why we've been married for 25 years and more. We're like some couples that don't even last that long. And we have Allan and I, we have hot tempers and we had discussion, Norm too, but we respect, we're able to discuss in a very civilized way. We don't take anything personal. And what happened is that the parents felt that it was not only me, only Allan, only Norm, was a team approach. And if I didn't have an answer, I brought in my partner, Dr. Michel Joubert, probably one of the best podiatrists in the world, because he has a background in training. He has a bachelor's degree in exercise science. Dr. Guy Voyer from France, famous osteopath. We had a lot of people coming in to help our players. And I think they appreciate it, like a Formula One team. It was not a one-trick pony. We had that. If we didn't have an answer, Allan called me or I call Allan, someone needed an emergency surgery, we will find the best guy in the world right away. And we discuss what would we do. And remember, we had like Jay Kiss and a couple of the guys coming in on the operation table, almost treating the guy as he comes out of the room with Milan and stuff. But the recovery was a lot faster because we cared. It's all about caring about, it's not me, it's not Allan, it's not Norm. It is how can we make that player the best he can through nutrition, through mindset, to helping them cope with reality and coming outside. I'm usually the age of their parents. And if it comes from your dad or mom, sometimes you'll say, then when it comes from Allan or Paul, they will say, okay, but it's the same lesson, but they will listen a little more.
One thing that I learned early on in the business, a lot has changed today, but early on when I was just getting started and representing my first few NHL players, was how behind the times NHL teams were when it came to strength and conditioning, off the ice, and particularly injury rehab. I mean, we're talking about teams with no resources. They didn't have anybody working, and it made no sense to me, because if you've got some of your star players injured, whether it's a groin injury or coming back from shoulder surgery, or you just had your knee scoped, and you want these players to come back healthy, strong, but also as fast as possible without putting them at risk. And many times early on, I would speak to NHL GMs about a client who just had a surgery or who is recovering from a groin injury, and say, listen, this is in your best interests here. You should let Paul come in and work on the player in your dressing room. And really, that was groundbreaking stuff at the time, to bring in somebody from outside the organization to actually come into the room and work with the player. And we were able to do that.
So that's really interesting, and that wasn't that long ago. I wondered, Allan, you talked about conditioning, and Paul and Allan, I wanted to ask you guys about this. The first people that you brought through the door, Allan, when you made that suggestion to the player, hey, maybe you want to talk to Paul, maybe we can clean up the diet, talk about conditioning, talk about posture. Were they receptive to that? Or was it kind of like, what do you mean? I've never had to worry about that before. Why do I care about this now?
There was a lot of interest in players wanting to be better and wanting to get educated in what it takes to give them an edge. And really the edge between themselves and other players where they were competing for jobs, or if they were beyond that, competing to be one of the best in the league, understanding how looking at everything they did off the ice could give them that edge was critical to their entire approach to being a professional, a true professional. And really, it was when they got to meet Paul, hear him out, listen to the different things he would propose, the different people he would take them to. Paul talks about Dr. Guy Voyer from France. I mean, I've seen Guy work on players, NHL stars, and the work that he does off the ice in getting them back from injury, or even just maintaining, doing maintenance work on different areas of the body is exceptional. And Dr. Voyer, a name that most people don't really recognize, is one of the most famous people in the world at what he does. And he came to us and all these great NHL players because of Paul.
Wow. Paul, let me ask you something. If I'm a young athlete, I'm one of Allan's clients and I'm just out of junior, I've just been drafted, and Allan sends me to you. What is going to be the first thing you look at? Do you look at my posture while I'm standing? Do you look at my posture while I'm skating? Do we talk about diet? Do we talk about exercise? How does that process start?
The first visit, it's always a posturology exam. Basically, you'll be like checking with a plumb line, or now we have different apparatus measuring how much pressure you put on one foot. If one foot is more in, if you're more forward, one hip, that's the first visit. And I'll give you some corrective exercise, either a bit like we did before with the eyes. And I need to correct the computer, working at the brain level, the first visit. Then after that, then when we start back in the gym, I don't even talk about nutrition right away, because I don't want to overwhelm the players, especially when you deal with young players. Sadly, still a lot of parents are too much involved. I have like a dojo approach more at the gym. Like my son used to be in martial art, I was too. Parents were not allowed in the dojo unless you bring in the check every month, because they didn't want to influence the first of all, the sensei didn't want to deal with the parents, but that's the main thing. Then in the first visit, I will do a postural exam, give him a couple of exercises. I want to put them in responsibility also. Going back to Dr. Guy Voyer, you will never treat an athlete if the athlete doesn't do his exercise. And it's very easy for him to see from one visit to the other, because he doesn't see my players a lot, that if you did it. That's why he always insisted every time he saw one of my young player or older player, he wanted me, if I could, to be there, take notes. And here's the exercise I would recommend he will do. Then I knew we filmed everything. That's what I do with the kid. I even do it on Zoom now, because for the last 2 years, like in Canada, gyms are been closed, but we do a great job analyzing on Zoom, giving exercise, and kids, I get great emails. Then after that, we start more to strength and conditioning, but based on a good foundation, and we address certain type of nutrition. Kids are getting smarter now with nutrition. There's more information now on it. The only issue we have, and Allan could testify, is that let's say they play junior or midget AAA and they stay in a billet. This is where you have to discuss with the family, because it's not their parents. They're not staying. In an ideal world, Allan and I, we had a huge hotel. We would have our own junior team, the Octagon, and then I would guarantee. No, but that's why in soccer, Barcelona,
they have the program.
Tottenham, they grab them at 10, 12 years old. You're part of their academy. They want to make sure that the same cheeseburger from McDonald's you ate in Chicago is the same as in LA, because that's where, no, but that's true. Us, the only thing that we have against us is that, let's say I work for an NHL team. I don't know what my players did in the summer, and the reverse. As a strength coach, if the player is very young, sometimes he will be drawn to do what the team does, but it doesn't mean it's good for him, because the testing was not done as precise as we did with him. It's almost go to the tailor and you get a nice jacket, but because your team has a jersey, it may not fit you as much as if you go to the tailor. But as a team player, you have no choice. And Allan could say to you, like, later on, when the player becomes a little more older, a little more established, they leave them alone. But it takes a while sometimes. And this is where the communication, like a guy like in San Jose, Mike Potenza, and a couple of guys in the NHL, sadly, not everybody communicates with us. Again, it's not about me. It's not about them. It's about the player. This is where the communication about the pro team or the junior team with the guy who takes care of them in off season, me, very important to be on the same page. See, that's where, because the player gets confused. Kids, they go and see their guys, their friends doing heavy bench press. And now the other guy, and he's jacked. He looks good on the ice, but he's young. Believe me, it's easy to go up, but it's hard to stay up without injury. A lot of time injuries are caused by gym work. And I could testify because I got 38 years of I've done mistakes. And we loaded the guys, and that's what everybody did. And it's not good. Actually, at the Hockey Summit, June 10 and 12, 11 and 12 with Scott Livingston, it's the biggest hockey summit there will be in Tremblant. Hopefully, it's going to be live. It's the 3rd edition. It's going to be amazing. And we discuss about that, how training evolve. Now, the kids are so lucky now because they have access to all the new technology and the stuff. And you see it. When I started, the grinders were in great shape. The skilled players played baseball in the summer, golf, and didn't do that much. Now, when you get a guy like Connor McDavid, even Sidney Crosby at his age, they're in tip-top shape. You have no choice now. It's not a 3rd or 4th line job now. It's not a guy that plays 4 or 5 minutes. Guys, they need to be in super shape because the game is so fast. It's so big. It's not the game at all. It's like these guys now, they're in great shape now.
Now, Adam, what Paul and I did, which was really groundbreaking at the time, was we'd worked together in designing a summer training camp in Montreal for NHL players. And not just NHL players, but players who are professional or even of junior age. And it became so well known that a vast majority of our European players, Czech players, would spend every summer 6 to 8 weeks, sometimes even longer than that, of their off season in Montreal. Wow. We were renting apartments before Airbnb and VRBO, finding apartments for guys to rent for, furnished apartments for 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks. And guys would be flying in from all over Europe to train with Paul. And we would have an arena as a home base where we'd have ice every day. And Paul would manage the on ice component of the camp. And then usually one day a week, we'd have a big scrimmage. And it came to fall on Fridays. And there was one time Paul and I were in the rink and we divided the teams up into Team Czech and Team Quebec. And when you looked at the players on the ice, I think Paul and I counted 8 or 9 players from the Czech Olympic team that year.
Yeah.
Wow.
Nice.
And some of the top Quebec-born NHL players. The scrimmages became so well known, and we'd hire refs to come in and actually keep score. That during the week, I'd be getting calls from NHL players all over Quebec who would come in just to want to play in the scrimmage on Friday because it was the best competitive hockey you could find in the summer to get them ready for camp. So lots of times there were players I didn't even work with who were calling up saying, "Hey, Allan, can I come out on Friday and participate in the scrimmage?" And Paul would manage all that. I would come into Montreal and spend a couple of weeks in August. And we would use that time to do financial meetings and other things with the guys to get them ready for the season. But the camp itself was a tremendous opportunity to do a couple of things. Number one, we built a real camaraderie within the agency amongst my clients. So they all got to know each other. They got to train with each other in the gym. They trained together on the ice. They either played with each other or against each other in scrimmages. There were a lot of nights we'd go out for dinners. And you'd have, a player from Russia, a player from Czech, a group of Quebec players, and really everybody was there to help each other. And certain players assumed a leadership role within the subgroup they were working with, and they would very much set the example by conducting themselves a certain way, the way they worked in the gym, where the younger guys coming in had a role model that they could look at and say, wow, that guy is one of the top players in the NHL, and I'm seeing how he trains and I'm seeing how he takes care of himself. And that's part of what I need to do to get to that level. And I found it to be very effective. And that's the part with Paul that came into being a life coach.
Okay. So I got to ask you both, because it's sort of fascinating to think about the NHL, as Paul put it, where the third and fourth liners are in great shape and the stars are kind of, let's have a few beers, do a golf game during the summer, go for a nice walk, that sort of thing. How quickly did you guys see results when you started doing this?
It's like within a couple of weeks, because again, what I was saying, guys playing golf and drinking, that was like about 20 years ago. But when it started, like with the era, like with Sidney Crosby and these guys, now there was a big game changer. Every guy had to be in tip-top shape. But guys are like, they're hockey players, again, to be at that level, even if you're a junior, it's tremendous athletes. I work with PGA guys. I used to bring like Marty Havlat or Milan Mikalik and some of my players to the Ledbetter Golf Academy. I worked with David for years, and David was shocked how quick these guys, sometimes they were not even on the right side, because most hockey players, if they're left-handed, they assume they play golf left, but it's not. You're right-handed. If you're lefty in hockey, you need to be right in golf. But again, I'm not there to change their swing. But Ledbetter was shocked how quick these guys picked it up, because their nervous system is so good, and their balance and their proprioception is so. That's why when you implement new type of training, and again, like Allan said, just being as a team, guys are human beings, were pack animals. And when you see a guy like Marty Havlat taking care of the young Czech guys, He doesn't speak English. He's like 15 years old. He's kind of far, but he wants to come to Montreal. And when Allan told me that kid's going to be good, it means, and Norm told me and other guys, he's going to be good. They're talking about like Marty Firk and these kids. And I met Michael Frolik. He was 12 years old on the ice in Kladno. I was with Marty Havlat and his brother. He told me his brother was playing with Shawinigan, Michael Frolik's brother. And he said, can my little brother comes on the ice with us? I was alone with Marty, beautiful ice in Kladno, right in the middle of the summer. And I see that kid at 12 says, whoa. And already he was kind of starting to be thick. Says, we think he's going to be good. You mean? I think he's going to be good. And I think Frolik had a good career. But that's
I want to be clear. We weren't representing Michael Frolik at 12 years old. We were representing,
no.
We were representing his older brother. And Michael was the first time we got to see him was when he was 12. He would be around the rink when we would do camps in Europe. Paul and I would go over to Czech Republic together and work with clients over there. Sometimes in the summers, and that's when we met Michael Frolik. Just want to clarify that very important point.
And Allan, on the ice side of things and the contract side of things and the stat side of things, did you notice with your clients right away just a bit of like a change, season to season when you started to deal with this stuff in the summer and really started to set them up for success?
When you go back to that era, and you look at the players that we worked with back then, Pierre-Marc Bouchard was a high draft pick. He trained with Paul from the time he was 15, 16 years of age, and he played in the NHL at 18. Marty Havlat played in the NHL at 19. Rostislav Olesh, another high draft pick, Florida Panthers client back then, played in the NHL at 19. Milan Michalek, high draft pick, San Jose, drafted in the top 10. He played in San Jose as an 18-year-old. Marc-Andre Fleury played, number 1 overall, yes, but he played for the Pittsburgh Penguins as an 18-year-old. Nobody was seeing players that young coming into the NHL. And yes, they were incredibly skilled, talented athletes, hockey players. But I really believed back then, and I still do today, that part of their education and awareness and off-ice training that they survived with Paul back then played a significant role in helping them get to the NHL when they did.
I got to ask you guys this. This is one of the things that Steve actually said when we were doing this interview. He's like, okay, you got to ask these 2 questions. Steve Paul is my co-host for my other show. And one of the things that he wanted to know about is oftentimes what filters through to us as fans is when players have crazy diets. Either they are very specific and very, very healthy, or they're very not specific and very unhealthy. It's the extremes that make it through. How do you get an 18-year-old to give up all the fun stuff that we all want to eat? Sugars and cookies and all the other things. And what do you say to an 18-year-old who's like, I don't know, I'm 18, I got a metabolism that can burn through anything. How do you get them on you got to eat this at this point, and it's probably not going to be as fun as you want it to be?
Well, it's called education, because the thing is that, as an example, if you talk about flour, now the last 30 years, they're putting so much like glyphosate in it. It's like where you heard about Roundup, and it's actually research. I work in neuroscience, and there's a lot of food that they're neurotoxic, and it's all about performance. I always ask the guy, when you eat, it's very simple for everybody that's listening. What you put in your mouth, how do you feel after you put it? The next hour. As simple as that. If you feel bad, don't eat it anymore. I don't think the first time you put a cigarette in your mouth, that tastes very good. Then don't do it. When you drink too much, how do you feel in the morning? Or you feel queasy? Then don't do it. As simple. It depends on the goal, but it's all about education. And don't get me wrong, you don't have to be too drastic. Like the rice cake with the dry hamburger and that, this is passé. I'm very fortunate to have good friends like Frédéric Moret, who's co-owner of Joe Beef, and Antonio Park. I love food, but I like to make healthy food taste good. That's why when Allan were talking about the camp we used to have, restaurant owners in Montreal were very happy to have my guys, because these guys spent a lot of money, but they like good food, and they all had that in common. That gathering around, like, either, I don't want to make publicity, like a Joe Beef, or it's great food. It tastes good, but it's good for you also. It's not like La Poutine on the corner, or they know, because when you train a lot, sometimes 2 hours a day, especially in August when you're in the gym, on the ice, pressure builds up. Some guys are contracted, you know it, Allan. There's life too. They have a wife, they have kids. Sometimes they have other things to do. Then when you eat and you feel good day after day, and also you got viruses like we see now. Mm-hmm. Your immune system, your recovery is good. You feel like, oh, that's not that bad. It doesn't. It's an acquired taste. Also, to detoxify the body of eating sweets and bad things. It doesn't happen the day before, but if you start young with your parents, that's why we're pushing a lot in schools to build like a regular, just a regular diet, like veggies, fruits, try to get more organic stuff, stay away from chemical, drink a lot of water, and take fresh air. And you'll have very good results.
Wow. It doesn't sound as hard as it always is made out to seem.
No, it's not.
So I love this. So the second thing is, Paul, and I, when you train human beings and you train bodies, especially, you're talking about the highest performing human beings on the planet in terms of physicality, right? The people that you talk to, you got Olympians, you got Stanley Cup winners. Is there an age where, and I'm asking this because I want to know for my own personal health a little bit here too, is there an age where it's like your body turns a corner naturally and you really need to pay attention and change the way you train, the way you eat, your posture? Because we all know when you're young, you can eat most things, you're going to burn it off. You got limitless energy, but at some point that change does happen. What is that change for athletes? And is it usually around the same age, or is it different every person?
But the human body is like a tomato plant. What do you do when you put your tomatoes in the back? You make sure you have a good stick to make sure that when the tomato plant's going to grow, it's going to go straight. You make sure the wind doesn't touch it too much. And after a while, you're able to remove the stick when it grows. Same thing as a young tree. The younger we get, that's the advantage we have with Allan, because we see guys very young. Like a lot of his athletes from Jonathan Drouin, Huberdeau, Fleury, 15, 16, sometimes younger than that, we see them, then we're able to establish a good stick on the side to make them grow in a good way. When they take care of their posture, and already we shoot in a bit of nutrition, just a little knowledge. I like education. You wouldn't might be surprised. A lot of my ex-hockey players, like a guy like Marty Havlat or Milan Mikalik, the Dufour-Lapointe sisters, and even Max Pacioretty, that's still active, they could be some of the best strength coach in the NHL because they're fascinated about their body. Like Marty and Milan had a lot of injuries. They learn about recovery, what to eat, what kind of exercise, and they became very good expert without knowing it. And this is going through education. And the quicker you get the athlete posturally, balance-wise, mentally, not being a monk, good food, the later the corner will be turned. That's the thing. When I was younger, some of the players I played against, and I'll be 61. By the age of 26, 27, you saw they were downhill. Why? They were drinking a lot. They didn't train that much in the summer. They were smoking cigarette. I mean, it happened. I mean, like they had a room at one point, some NHL team. The coach went in to smoke. Some guys were smoking in the room. In the arena, people were smoking. That was pretty unhealthy. The Zamboni had like carbon monoxide, like you're in a garage. That was, He put 15,000 people smoking, making the ice. You're breathing. I mean, come on. You have like, it's tough, man. Hockey is not an easy sport. If you start young, you'll turn the corner way later. And we see it now. We see guys that they're playing later on, and they're still very, very good. Marc-André Fleury is 37. You don't see a difference between, no one's going to say, oh, he had a bad game because he's 37. He had bad games when he was 19, and he has good games. He's 37. I mean, but his body is able to continue, and that's the key. But he has good lifestyle. He's married, stable. He eats well. He trains a lot, not crazy, but in a good way. And he's going to stop playing when he wants to stop playing. That's the key, man. See, that's it. It's a myth. I went to play hockey 2 days ago with kids, like they don't see me because I have my toque, I got my goggles, but I'm not an NHL player, but I can move with these kids like bantam, AAA, midget. I have no problem.
Wow.
And like I'm their grandfather's age.
Yes.
But if you take care of the body, it's all right. You'll be okay.
Yeah. Paul, can you talk about some of your work with Olympic athletes, especially the Dufour-Lapointe sisters?
Well, the Dufour-Lapointe sister, they're leaving today actually for Beijing. It's going to be for Chloe, her 4th Olympic, and Justin, her 3rd Olympics. And Justin and Chloe are the only one in the history of FIS, Federation International of Ski, of winning gold and silver at Sochi Olympics. And later on, the year after, they were the first 3 girls, because they're 3 sisters. Maxime, who's in med school, it's her 4th year med school. With Chloe and Justin, were 1, 2, 3 on a podium in a FIS World Cup. And I've been with them for almost 20 years. I met Maxime. Maxime just turned 33, 32. I met her. She was like 12, 13 years old. And I've been with them since then to help them. And they always train. And Allan, that's why he knows them. He was fascinated. These young girls, they didn't train like skiers. They train with Brassard. You turn around with Huberdeau. They're with Patch. They're with Marty. No, like when Marty went to the Olympics with the Czech team in 210 in Vancouver,
yeah,
Chloe was the only one. Chloe, I think we had Pavlet. We had a lot of players on that team at 210 in Vancouver. Chloe was hanging out with the Czech team. The Canadian guys were like, "What are you doing there?" They were giving him shit. They were says, "Those are my training partners in the summer." There was hey, Chloe, and they used to bring her with them and like make sure everything is all right and you need anything, and that was the nature. But they were amazing. And up to today, in the summer, like the last 2 summer, I trained my athletes, my hockey players, mainly outdoor. They were all the time with UB and these guys all the time training, and toe to toe too. And that's how they got their level. Same thing with Gabriela Papadakis and Guillaume Cicero. They're 5-time world champ in figure skating and dance, and they train a lot with my NHL. They're probably going to win this year. I hope. But the gold, they went in Pyeongchang. They finished 2nd behind our Canadians. But I mean, that's the time of athletes that all mix around. I remember when Georges St. Pierre was helping him with his hip. Was training some of the older guys like Yann Leperrier and Darcy and these guys and Marty. And Marty was young, and they used to see, wow, George coming in. It was like no one talked. And George is very George look at them like, come on, guys, I'm just a fighter. I don't see it. And George is so humble. But they stepped it up. It was insane in the gym when George just entered the gym to do his rehab for his hip. And that's how the parallel now, like, it's a good question, Allan, because I could see like the last 10 years, professional athletes went like this. Before, Olympic athletes were very high level. We had all the technology. They were more serious, not a lot of off time. But I would say the last 5-6 years now, especially in the NHL, I see a big movement upward for the good. There's less non-impact injuries now. There's starting to be more. You hear less of groin. You hear slowly. Guys are changing their system of training. Less heavy weights, less pounding the body too much, more recovery. They do sauna. They watch their eating. They do meditation. They do stretching and ice bath. Like this afternoon, I'm going to roll in the snow. They do that. Most of my players, they bought their own sauna. They do a lot of work. They invest a lot of time and money, and they know that's going to be paying later on. That at 50, they won't be in a wheelchair having 2 hip surgery, because people forget hockey players deserve way more respect than that. You're a banker, you make pretty much the same amount of money that they do, but after your career, you'll be able to play with your kids, no problem. That's the thing. And now you have to respect them that, listen, every day they're putting their body under a lot of beating, inflammation. And I mean, their joints, they hurt by the age of 40 or 45. And that's why us as researchers, we're there to try to help them more to have a better after career that at least they'll be able to play with their kids and their grandkids and spending their good money that Allan got them through good contracts.
Well, I hear he's a tough negotiator, Paul. That's just the rumor.
I tell you, he done miracle because poor Allan, I send him some players because you know what happens in an arena when you have all these guys. And Allan, I mean, he has a big roster, and some other guys, they see that like, wow, my agent never called me. He's never here. Allan is always there. Can I have a meeting with him? And some of the guys, they were okay, but as a favor, it's okay, Gagne, I'll get the meeting. And sometimes the guy gave Allan a good impression and he signed him. And they were shocked what kind of contract he got them from an American League only guy that like, whoa, I got a one-way in the NHL, or what's going on here? But and I think I saw his smile that he had a lot more fun with these kind of like, I don't want to say lower level player, but they were not like the Crosby or the Pacioretty. But Allan had the biggest smile in his face when he's able to nail a great. And these guys, a lot of these guys, and Allan could testify, he became better. Most of these guys, they were kind of signed for third, fourth line. A lot of them ended up in first line after a year or two or three because they say, hey, I can play that game. And that's the key. And this is where I mean, we're paid to see that, the big smile, and everybody's happy, and life is very short, guys.
There's a real truth behind, I think, players being more motivated, more focused when they truly believe that other people, specifically the people around them, believe in them. And you know, nothing is as demoralizing to players as feeling like the people around you, your agent, your strength and conditioning coach, don't care about you or have given up on you. And by continuing to push them and be there for them, I've had many players over the years say to me that was one element in what really had them at times when they were doubting themselves, really refocus, reset. Sometimes you have to take a step sideways or even a step backwards to move forwards in the future. Just being able to give somebody your emotional support, being able to do little things for them behind the scenes really gives them the motivation and the feeling inside. I think that, you know, hey, I don't want to let these people down. They believe in me. And that's something that you can't really quantify. You can't put a number on that, but it's real. And Paul and I together have seen that time and time again. Wow.
I mean, proof's in the pudding. There have been, you look at the players on the roster and the ones that, Allan, I'm thinking specifically of a Vezina Trophy winner from last season. Somebody who, was on this show, Marc-Andre Fleury. What a bounce back year, I quote unquote bounce back year. But I think what it was Marc-Andre Fleury seemed to believe in himself. And it seems like the people around him believed in him too. He wins a Vezina Trophy and does extremely, extremely well. So listen, Allan, do you have anything more you'd like to add before we wrap up the show?
No, I think we've covered it well. Paul, you've been incredibly generous with your time and to share some of the great stories behind the scenes. Thank you so much for joining us. And Adam, you want to wrap up?
Well, I do. But I just want to say to Paul, thank you so much for your time today. It's been fascinating as a fan to learn about what life is like when we don't see them on the ice, when we don't see our favorite players on the ice. Good luck to all the athletes you're training that went to the Olympics, and of course, we hope you'll join us again because it was absolutely fascinating. And now you got me thinking I got to go see a posturologist, and I got to probably get orthotics and get my ass in gear. Really, I'll be honest.
Yeah, and watch what you eat, Adam. Watch what you eat.
Yes,
That's the
that
key.
too. No question.
Yeah.